A wealthy entrepreneur wrongfully dismisses a black employee after getting her pregnant. Years later, their son unknowingly joins the man's company, leading to an explosive revelation when the man hears the son's last name. Lena Monroe sat stiffly in front of Marcus Vance's imposing desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The leather chair beneath her was cold, unwelcoming, as though it were trying to remind her she didn't belong here. Marcus, as always, was focused on the papers spread out in front of him, the sound of his pen scratching against the paper echoing in the silence. The minutes stretched endlessly, each one only intensifying Lena's unease. Finally, Marcus put his pen down and leaned back in his chair. He looked at her with the same composed, calculating expression that had both impressed and intimidated her in the past. "Lena," he said, his voice calm yet distant, "I assume this isn't a work-related matter." Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. She had rehearsed this moment in her head countless times, but now that she was here, her voice felt trapped. She swallowed hard and forced the words out. "No, it's not," she said softly, her gaze dropping to her lap. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus didn't move, didn't react, as if she hadn't spoken at all. Each passing second grew heavier until at last he spoke. "I see." That was it. Nothing more. Lena blinked, her pulse racing. "It's yours, Marcus," she added, willing herself to sound steady. "I thought you should know." Marcus sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. He steepled his fingers, his tone as detached as ever. "This is unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Lena's voice wavered, disbelief crashing over her. She had expected shock, anger, maybe even guilt. But this? Indifference? "Yes," Marcus said, his gaze finally locking with hers. His expression was cold, detached. "You should have been more careful." Her stomach twisted painfully. "We were careful," she stammered. "Clearly not careful enough," he retorted, his words slicing through her like ice. Marcus leaned back again, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And now you're telling me because—" "What? You expect me to do something about it?" Lena's throat tightened. She hadn't thought this far ahead, hadn't imagined it would go like this. "I thought you'd want to know," she said quietly. "I thought maybe we could work something out." Marcus's face hardened. "Work something out? Lena, you know how these things work. I'm married, I have a family, a reputation. This," he gestured vaguely between them, "was never supposed to be anything more than it was." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt like a fool. The late nights in his office, the whispered promises, the stolen moments, she had let herself believe they meant something. But to him, it had always been disposable. Lena straightened her posture, determination igniting in her chest. "I'm keeping the baby, Marcus." He sighed again and stood, moving around his desk to stand in front of her. "I can't be involved in this, Lena. You know that. This conversation never happened. Understand?" Her blood ran cold. "What? You're just walking away?" "I have to," he said, his voice firm but eerily calm. "And you should, too." Lena rose to her feet, anger building inside her. "I can't just walk away from this, Marcus. It's your child, too." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Lena," he said, his tone low and sharp, "I'm warning you. Let this go. I've taken care of you, but if you make this a problem for me, I'll make sure you regret it." Her heart sank. What are you saying?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he returned to his desk, his movements measured and deliberate. When he sat back down, his face was icy and devoid of emotion. "I'm saying this is your last day at Vance Industries. I've already spoken with HR. You'll receive a severance package, but after today, you're no longer employed here." The words landed like a physical blow. "You're firing me because I'm pregnant? Because of you?" "I'm protecting my family," he said coolly. "And you should do the same. If you try to come after me, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." Lena's hands trembled as fury and disbelief warred inside her. She stared at Marcus, the man she had once trusted, and saw only a stranger. "I never thought you'd do this," she said, her voice shaking. "You never should have thought anything else," he replied, his tone so detached it sent chills down her spine. Tears threatened to spill, but Lena blinked them back. She wouldn't cry in front of him. She refused to give him that satisfaction. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office. Her legs felt like lead as she made her way back to her desk. Her hands moved mechanically as she packed up her belongings, each item slipping into her bag feeling heavier than the last. In the elevator down to the lobby, she stared at her reflection in the polished walls, fighting to hold herself together. But inside she was crumbling. Her job, her future. Everything she had worked so hard for had been ripped away in a matter of minutes. And now, she was alone. Pregnant, jobless, and blacklisted. When she stepped onto the street, the tears finally fell. She felt invisible, just another face in the crowd. No one would ever know the truth. Marcus Vance had made sure of that, but as she walked away from the towering glass building that had once held her dreams, she placed a hand on her stomach. She wasn't truly alone. She still had her child. And somehow she would survive. As Lena stepped into the lobby, her reflection in the gleaming elevator walls caught her eye. Her face was pale, her shoulders slumped. She tried to muster some sense of composure, but the truth was, she felt like her world had crumbled. Her job, gone. Her future, derailed. The career she had worked so hard to build had been snatched away in mere minutes. By the time the elevator doors opened, her emotions were too much to contain. She stepped out into the busy city street, tears streaming down her face. Around her, life went on as if nothing had happened. People rushed by, unaware of her pain. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. But as Lena moved further away from the towering Vance Industries building, her hand instinctively went to her stomach. Beneath her heartbreak, something else flickered: determination. She wasn't truly alone. Her child was with her. No matter what, they would survive. The early morning sun streamed through the blinds in Darian Blake's room, casting long, striped shadows across the floor. He stood in front of the mirror, tugging at the knot of his tie for the 5th time. Today was the day, his first day at Vance Enterprises, and his nerves felt like a live wire buzzing under his skin. "Looking good," he muttered to himself, straightening his shoulders and giving his reflection a nod. From the kitchen, the sound of boiling water reached his ears. His mom, Lena, was already up. He smiled at the thought of her reaction when he'd come home later that evening to tell her how the day had gone. Checking his phone, he realized it was almost time to leave. He grabbed his bag and headed into the kitchen, where Lena sat at the small table with a mug of tea in her hands. She looked up as he entered, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, how do I look?" Darian asked, grinning as he did a quick spin to show off his new suit. "First day at Vance Enterprises. This is big, right?" Lena nodded, but her fingers tightened around her mug. "Yeah, Darian, it's big." Her tone gave him pause. It wasn't the enthusiastic reaction he'd expected. Instead, there was something in her voice that sounded almost worried. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, sitting across from her. "You don't seem as happy about this as I thought you'd be." She dropped her gaze to the swirling steam rising from her mug. "I am happy for you," she said quietly. I don't know about that place." Darian frowned, confused. "What do you mean? It's Vance Enterprises, one of the biggest firms in the country. This is huge, for me, for us." "I know," Lena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that place, it's not what you think it is." He stared at her, trying to make sense of her cryptic words. "What are you talking about? Did you know someone who worked there?" Her hands tightened around the mug, her knuckles whitening. For a moment, it looked like she was about to say something more, but then she shook her head. "It's not like that. I just want you to be careful, that's all." Darian leaned back, his frustration bubbling. His mom had always been his biggest supporter, the one person who constantly encouraged him to dream big. But now, when he was finally on the brink of achieving something great, she seemed to be holding back. "Careful?" he repeated, his voice tinged with irritation. "Mom, this is what we've been working toward for years. All those late nights studying, all those internships. I didn't do it for nothing. This job could change everything for us." "I know, baby," Lena said, looking up at him at last. Her eyes were shadowed with something he couldn't quite place. "But not everything is what it seems." "What do you mean?" Darian asked, leaning forward. "Why are you saying this now? You were so excited when I first told you about the job." She hesitated again, the tension between them thickening like a fog. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I just don't want you to get hurt. Some places, they have shadows, Darian. Things you don't see until it's too late." He frowned, her cryptic warning only frustrating him further. "Shadows? Mom, it's just a job. An opportunity. I'm not walking into a trap. This is going to help us. It's going to help you. Lena's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Darian noticed how weary she looked. Just promise me you'll be careful, she said softly. His frustration ebbed as he saw the worry etched into her face. He sighed and nodded. I'll be careful, I promise. But you've got to trust me, Mom. I've worked too hard to let anything mess this up. Lena nodded, but the concern in her eyes didn't fade. I trust you, Darian. I always have. He stood, checking the time on his phone. I've got to go. I'll call you later, okay? She offered him a thin smile, one that seemed to take effort. Good luck, baby. Darian bent to kiss her on the forehead before grabbing his briefcase and heading for the door. As he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something his mother wasn't telling him. As Darian reached the door, he paused and glanced back. His mom, Lena, was still seated at the table, her hands wrapped around her mug, staring into the tea as if searching for answers. Her face was drawn, her expression tense. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crept into Darian's chest, but he quickly shook it off. This was his moment. Nothing was going to stand in his way. The subway ride into Westview Heights felt like the start of something monumental. Darian stood in the crowded car, gripping the pole tightly as his thoughts raced. This was everything he had worked for, the first step toward the successful career he'd always dreamed of. He wasn't about to let his mom's strange warnings distract him. Vance Enterprises wasn't just any company, it was a powerhouse, a giant in its industry. Getting hired wasn't easy, and Darian had beaten out hundreds of applicants for his spot. If Lena was worried, it was probably just nerves. This was a big change, after all. Maybe she was scared about what it would mean for their future. He'd talk to her about it later, once she'd had time to calm down. As he stepped out of the subway station, Darian stopped in his tracks. The sleek glass tower of Vance Enterprises loomed above him, its mirrored surface catching the sunlight and shimmering like a beacon of success. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the entrance. This is it, he thought. This is where it all begins. The lobby was massive and buzzing with quiet energy. Professionals moved with purpose, their heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Darian approached the reception desk to check in, and within minutes he was being escorted upstairs by his new supervisor, Miss Harper. Welcome aboard, Darian, Miss Harper said as they stepped into the elevator. She was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a brisk demeanor. Thank you, ma'am, Darian replied, feeling his nerves give way to excitement. I'm ready to get started. Miss Harper gave him a curt nod. Good. Let's see if you can live up to the potential we saw in your application. The elevator doors opened, revealing a maze of glass-walled offices and neat rows of cubicles. Everything was sleek, pristine, and intimidatingly professional. As they walked, Darian soaked in the atmosphere. The intensity of the workplace was palpable. Everyone seemed deeply focused, moving with purpose as if every second counted. As they made their way through the office, Darian spotted him, Marcus Vance. The CEO was standing near a conference room, deep in conversation with a group of senior executives. Darian couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration. Marcus Vance was a self-made mogul, a man who had built an empire from the ground up. He was everything Darian aspired to be. But then, as they walked by, Marcus's gaze flickered toward Darian. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Darian froze. Marcus's expression remained neutral, professional, but there was something in his eyes, something fleeting, like a shadow passing through. Recognition, unease, whatever it was gone in an instant. Marcus turned back to his conversation without another glance. Darian shook off the strange feeling and continued walking. It was probably just his imagination. Marcus Vance didn't know him. He was just another new hire in a company of thousands. Still, that brief moment lingered in the back of his mind. Miss Harper stopped at a desk near the center of the office and handed him a stack of documents. Here's your starting point, she said briskly. Get familiar with the workflow and have this reviewed by the end of the day. Yes, ma'am, Darian replied, taking the papers and sitting down at his new desk. As the hours passed, Darian threw himself into his work. The thrill of starting fresh, pushing aside the doubts that had crept in earlier. This was his chance to prove himself, to show that he belonged here. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, his mother's words kept replaying in his mind. Some places have shadows, Darian, things you don't see until it's too late. He shook his head, trying to clear the thought. There were no shadows here, just opportunities. Whatever his mom was worried about, it couldn't touch him now. By mid-morning, the office had settled into a steady rhythm. The hum of keyboards and quiet conversations filled the air as Darian worked through the stack of reports Miss Harper had given him. The work was straightforward, but the weight of the environment pressed on him. Vance Enterprises wasn't a place for mistakes or hesitation. Still, no matter how much he tried to concentrate, his thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus Vance. That flicker of something in the CEO's eyes when they had crossed paths, it didn't make sense. Why would Marcus notice him? Darian was just another entry-level employee in a massive corporation. First-day jitters, he muttered to himself, flipping through the report in front of him. Darian had always been prone to overthinking, especially when something big was on the line. He needed to shake it off and focus. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to waste it. Lunchtime came and went. Darian ate quickly at his desk, determined to stay ahead of his workload. But even as the afternoon dragged on, that strange feeling from the hallway lingered, like a shadow he couldn't quite shake. Darian worked through the dense stack of reports Miss Harper had assigned him. Each document was packed with data and jargon, but he tackled them with focus, determined to make a strong first impression. Vance Enterprises had a reputation for being cutthroat, a place where people were judged by their output and nothing else. Darian wasn't about to fall behind, not on his first day. Yet as the hours ticked by, that unsettling feeling from earlier wouldn't leave him. It wasn't just the way Marcus Vance had looked at him. There was something else, something he couldn't quite name, lurking just beneath the surface. It wasn't until later in the afternoon, when Miss Harper came by to check his progress, that the unease settled in again. "You're doing well," she said, glancing over his shoulder at the screen. "Good pace." "Thank you," Darian replied, leaning back slightly to stretch. "Just trying to keep up with everything." "You're handling it just fine. Keep it up." She turned to leave but paused, her expression suddenly more serious. "Oh, and I almost forgot. Mr. Vance wants to see you in his office." Darian blinked, his heart skipping a beat. "Mr. Rawl Vance?" "Yes." She didn't elaborate, her tone neutral. "He's on the 50th floor. You can head up now." Before Darian could ask any more questions, Miss Harper walked away, leaving him sitting at his desk in stunned silence. Why would Marcus Vance want to see him? And on his first day, no less? Darian's pulse quickened as he stood and straightened his jacket. This wasn't normal. New hires didn't get summoned by the CEO on day one, not unless something unusual was going on. He glanced around the office, but no one seemed to notice his departure. The hum of work continued around him as he made his way to the elevator, palms damp and heart racing. This could be good news, he told himself, trying to steady his breathing. Maybe Marcus had seen something impressive on his resume. Maybe he wanted to personally welcome Darian to the company. But as the elevator ascended, another thought crept into his mind, a darker one. His mother's voice echoed faintly in his memory. "Some places have shadows, Darian. Things you don't see until it's too late." The elevator chimed, interrupting his thoughts. The doors slid open, revealing the executive floor, and Darian stepped out into a completely different atmosphere. The floor was quieter than the bustling lower levels. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in natural light, illuminating sleek furniture and soft carpet that muted the sound of his footsteps. Everything about this place radiated power and importance. Darian approached the receptionist, a poised woman with a warm yet professional demeanor. "I'm here to see Mr. Vance, Darian Blake." She nodded, gesturing to the large wooden doors behind her. "He's expecting you. Go right in." Darian hesitated for a moment, his nerves reaching a crescendo. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The office was vast, with a panoramic view of the city skyline that made Darian feel even smaller than he already did. Marcus Vance sat behind a large mahogany desk, his back to the window as he flipped through some papers. For a moment, Darian stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Finally, Marcus looked up, his face calm and unreadable. "Darian," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Come in. Have a seat." Darian crossed the room and sat in the leather chair opposite the desk. His heart pounded as the imposing presence of Marcus Vance settled over him. "So," Marcus began, leaning back in his chair, "how's your first day going?" Darian swallowed hard, doing his best to keep his voice steady. "Good, sir. I've been working through the reports Miss Harper gave me. Everything's going well so far." Marcus nodded, setting the papers aside. His gaze sharpened, studying Darian with a quiet intensity. "That's good to hear." A silence fell between them, heavy and charged. Marcus leaned back further, his eyes never leaving Darian's. There was something in the way he was looking at him, as if he were trying to place him, to unearth some hidden connection. Darian shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. "Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, Mr. Vance?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "You're new here, Darian. Just starting out, but your name caught my attention." Darian's chest tightened. "My name?" Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them before he leaned forward. "Blake, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Darian said cautiously. Marcus studied him for a moment longer before sitting back, his face unreadable. "It's a strong name. Reminds me of someone I used to know." Darian's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Marcus could hear it. Was it possible that Marcus somehow knew, that he had pieced together the truth in this brief conversation? But Marcus didn't press further. Instead, he offered a faint smile, a professional one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I like to keep track of the new talent coming into the company," Marcus said. "We expect great things from you, Darian. Keep up the good work." Darian nodded, unsure of what else to say. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Marcus glanced down at the papers on his desk, signaling that the conversation was over. Darian stood, his legs unsteady, and made his way toward the door. But just as he reached for the handle, Marcus's voice stopped him. "Oh, and Darian?" Darian turned, his hands still on the door. "If you ever need anything," Marcus said, his tone calm but laced with something Darian couldn't quite identify, "my door is always open." Darian forced a nod. "I'll keep that in mind." With that, he stepped out of the office, his heart still racing. The door closed softly behind him, and Darian stood in the quiet hallway, trying to process what had just happened. Why had Marcus Vance taken such an interest in him? Why had he summoned him on his first day? Darian's mind raced as he returned to the elevator. Whatever the reason, one thing was certain. This job was not going to be as straightforward as he had thought. Darian felt the weight of Marcus Vance's words settle over him as he stepped out of the CEO's office. The door closed softly behind him, and he stood in the hushed hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no logical reason for Marcus to take such an interest in him, no reason for him to call Darian up on his very first day. Yet the way Marcus had looked at him, the way he had lingered on his last name, left Darian uneasy. By the time he returned to his desk, the elevator ride down had felt like an eternity. The steady hum of the office buzzed around him, but it did little to quiet the unease twisting in his stomach. His mother's warning echoed in his mind, sharper now. Some places have shadows. Darian couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was off, and he needed to figure out what it was. The familiar scent of home greeted him as he unlocked the door to the apartment. It was a comforting mix of his mom Lena's cooking and the faint lavender she always used when cleaning. For a brief moment, it almost eased the tension that had followed him throughout the day. He placed his briefcase by the door and loosened his tie as he stepped into the living room. Lena was there, seated on the couch with a book in her lap. She looked up when he entered, but her expression was hard to read. "How was it?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge Darian couldn't quite place. He hesitated, unsure how to sum up the day. The excitement of starting his new job, the strangeness of Marcus Vance's interest in him, the lingering unease, it all felt like too much to explain. "It was fine," he said finally, sitting down beside her. He tried to sound convincing. "Busy. They've got me working on a lot of reports. I'm just trying to get a feel for the place." Lena nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on him a moment too long. "Nothing unusual happened?" Darian paused. He didn't want to worry her more than she already seemed to be, but lying outright didn't feel right either. "Not really," he started, but then stopped himself. There was no point in hiding it. "Well, actually," he said, shifting slightly in his seat, "I met Marcus Vance today." Lena's hand tightened around the book in her lap, her knuckles whitening. You met him? Yeah, Darian said, nodding. He called me up to his office. I don't even know why. It was strange. I mean, he's the CEO. Why would he care about some new hire? Lena didn't respond immediately. Her eyes darkened as she looked away, her posture stiffening at the mention of Marcus. She wasn't surprised, not in the way Darian thought she'd be. Mom, Darian said, leaning forward, his voice softening. What is it? Why are you acting like this? Lena's breath caught. She set her book down on the coffee table, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. Darian, there's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice tight. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Darian frowned, his stomach knotting. What do you mean? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath before speaking. Marcus Vance, he's not just your boss. The word sent a chill through him. What? Darian whispered, a cold wave of confusion washing over him. Lena opened her eyes, meeting his. They were filled with regret, pain, and something else, something deeper. He's your father, Darian. For a second, the words didn't make sense. Darian stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. His father? Marcus Vance? The Marcus Vance? That can't be right, Darian said, his voice barely audible. It's true, Lena said, her voice shaky but firm. Marcus and we were involved a long time ago before you were born. Darian shook his head, the disbelief hitting him like a wave. But you said my father left. You never told me who he was. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair as his thoughts raced. How could you keep this from me? How could you not tell me? Lena stood as well, her hands wringing together. I was trying to protect you, Darian. I didn't want you to grow up knowing what kind of man he is. What kind of man? Darian's voice rose, a mixture of anger and shock spilling out. You didn't think I deserved to know? To know who my father is? Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but she didn't look away. I didn't want you to be hurt, she said, her voice trembling. Marcus, when I told him I was pregnant, he didn't want anything to do with us. He fired me, blacklisted me from the industry. He left me with nothing. Darian froze, her words sinking in like a heavy weight. He blacklisted you? Lena nodded, wiping her eyes. I couldn't get a job anywhere. I had no income, no support. It was just me and you, Darian. I had to fight for everything we had. Marcus didn't care. He just wanted me out of his life, and he made sure I couldn't come back. Darian felt his stomach churn. The man he had admired, the man he had unknowingly worked for, had done this. He had abandoned them, destroyed Lena's career, and left her to fend for herself. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Darian asked, his voice quieter now, but still filled with hurt. All these years I've wondered about him. I asked you, but you never said anything. Why now? Lena's face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch. Her hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. I thought I could bury it, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to know what he'd done. But when you told me you got the job at Vance Enterprises, I couldn't keep it from you anymore. You deserve to know the truth. I just didn't know how to tell you. Darian stood there, staring at her as the weight of everything crashed down on him. His father, the man he had imagined as a mystery, a distant figure, was Marcus Vance. And now, everything he thought he knew about his life had changed. Tears filled Lena's eyes, but she held Darian's gaze. I didn't want you to be hurt, she said softly. Marcus, he didn't want you. When I told him I was pregnant, he fired me, cut me off from everything, and when I tried to find work elsewhere, he blacklisted me from the entire industry. Darian froze, her words crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He blacklisted you? Lena nodded, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. Yes, I couldn't get a job after that. No one would hire me. I had no income, no support. It was just me and you. I had to fight to make ends meet. He didn't care. All he wanted was to erase us from his life. Darian's stomach churned. The man he had admired for his success and power, the man he had just met in his office, was responsible for this. He had left his mother with nothing, abandoned him before he was even born. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Darian asked, his voice quieter now, but still tinged with hurt. All these years, I've wondered about him. I asked you so many times. Why now? Lena's face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. I thought I could keep it buried, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to know what kind of man he is. But when you told me you got the job at Vance Enterprises, I couldn't hide it anymore. You deserve to know the truth, Darian. I just didn't know how to tell you." Darian stared at her, his chest tight with a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, sadness. For years he had imagined his father as a distant mystery, someone who had simply disappeared. But now, the truth was so much worse. He ran a hand over his face, pacing the room. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice shaking. "I've been working for him, sitting in his office talking to him like I'm just another employee, and all this time, he knew." Lena looked up at him, her voice weak but steady. "He doesn't know who you are, Darian. He didn't recognize you." "That's not the point," Darian snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of his anger. "He abandoned us, Mom. He destroyed your life. And now I'm supposed to just sit there and work for him like nothing happened?" Lena's eyes were pleading. "I didn't tell you this to make you hate him," she said, her voice trembling. "I told you because I didn't want you to walk into that place without knowing the truth. I didn't want you to get close to him, only to be hurt all over again." Darian's chest heaved as he tried to steady his breathing. His entire world felt like it was spinning out of control. His father wasn't some unknown figure. He was a man who had actively worked to ruin his mother's life. He stopped pacing, turning to face Lena. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, his voice filled with despair. "Do I confront him? Do I quit?" Lena stood and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "That's your choice, Darian," she said softly. "But you need to think carefully. Marcus is powerful. He could ruin you, just like he ruined me." Darian met her eyes, the anger still burning in his chest. "I'm not afraid of him," he said firmly. "He can't hurt me like he hurt you." Lena sighed, her face etched with worry. "I just want you to be safe." Darian stared at her, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him like a crushing tide. He didn't know what his next move would be, but one thing was clear. He couldn't keep working for Marcus Vance like nothing had happened. "I'll figure it out," he said finally, his voice tight. "But I can't stay there. Not after this." Lena nodded, her expression softening. "Whatever you decide, Darian, I'm with you." Darian took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. Everything he thought he knew about his life was gone, shattered in an instant. The job he had thought would be his big break now felt like a betrayal, and the man he had admired, his father, was nothing more than a stranger who had caused his family immeasurable pain. He sat down beside Lena, the truth settling into his bones like a cold weight. The life he had known was over, and now he had to decide what to do with the pieces left behind. The subway rumbled beneath Darian's feet as he stared out the window, his reflection flickering in the dark tunnels. It had been 2 days since Lena told him the truth. 2 days since everything he thought he knew about his life had been turned upside down. He still couldn't wrap his head around it. Marcus Vance was his father. Darian clenched his fists as the thought settled deeper in his mind. Every time he replayed the conversation with his mom, the anger inside him grew. The man who had built an empire, who had seemed larger than life, had abandoned him and his mother without a second thought. And now Darian was working for him, sitting in the same building, pretending everything was fine. The subway screeched to a halt, jolting Darian out of his thoughts. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the platform, the cold morning air hitting him as he walked toward the towering glass building of Vance Enterprises. The place that had once symbolized his dreams now felt like a cage, trapping him in a truth he hadn't asked for. Darian wrestled with the thoughts swirling in his mind as the subway screeched to a halt. He had to pull himself together before he walked into the office. He couldn't afford to let anyone see how close he was to breaking. Not yet, not until he figured out what to do next. The cold morning air hit him as he stepped out of the station and onto the crowded streets of Westview Heights. Ahead, the glass tower of Vance Enterprises rose into the sky, sleek and imposing. What had once felt like a symbol of his dreams now loomed like a prison, trapping him in a twisted game he hadn't even realized he was playing. Inside the bustling office, phones rang, keyboards clattered, and voices hummed in quiet conversations. No one paid much attention as Darian walked to his desk, which suited him just fine. He needed time to think. But as soon as he sat down, the weight of everything crashed down on him again. He stared at his laptop, the blinking cursor taunting him. Every task seemed pointless in the shadow of what he now knew. How could he sit here, pretending everything was fine, knowing the truth? Knowing that the man running this company, Marcus Vance, had abandoned him and destroyed his mother's life without a second thought? The worst part was that Marcus didn't even recognize him. Darian had seen it in Marcus's eyes on the first day, the fleeting flicker of recognition, quickly dismissed. To Marcus, Darian was just another employee, another face in the crowd. That realization made Darian's blood boil even more. He glanced across the office toward Marcus's assistant, who sat at her desk outside his corner office. The door was closed, as it often was, but Darian could picture him in there, calm and composed, running the company like nothing had happened, managing hundreds of employees while the truth of his past remained buried. Not for much longer, Darian thought grimly. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't just sit here, knowing what he knew, and do nothing. But what was he supposed to do? Storm into Marcus's office and confront him? Lay everything bare in front of the entire company? He had imagined it so many times, the look of shock on Marcus's face, the truth spilling out like a flood. But then what? Marcus had power, influence. He could twist the situation against Darian just as he had done to Lena all those years ago. Darian stared blankly at his screen, the words on the report in front of him blurring together. He couldn't act recklessly. He needed to be smart. The morning dragged on, and Darian tried to focus, but the tension in his shoulders only grew. Every time he looked up from his work, the sight of Marcus's closed office door made his skin crawl. Lunch came and went, though Darian barely touched his food. His mind was consumed by racing thoughts. He couldn't stay here, working for Marcus, but he couldn't just quit either. Not without confronting him first. He needed answers. Why had Marcus fired Lena? Why had he blacklisted her, leaving them with nothing? And did Marcus even care about the consequences of his actions? As Darian returned to his desk after lunch, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from Lena. "How are you holding up?" Darian sighed, typing a quick reply, trying to figure it out. He didn't have the heart to tell her how much worse he felt today than he had the day before. He could still see the worry in her eyes from that morning, the fear she had tried so hard to hide. She didn't want him caught in Marcus's world. She didn't want him hurt the way she had been. But Darian couldn't let it go. He couldn't walk away without knowing why. As the afternoon dragged on, his frustration mounted. His work felt mechanical, every task just a distraction from the fury simmering beneath the surface. He kept his head down, but his thoughts raced. Finally, toward the end of the day, Darian made up his mind. He couldn't keep stewing in silence. He had to confront Marcus face to face. But not here. Not in the middle of the office, where Marcus held all the power. He needed to catch Marcus off guard, in a setting where he wasn't in control. Somewhere outside the confines of the office, where Darian could speak freely. His heart pounded as he stood from his desk, determination settling in his chest. It was time to confront the truth, and the man who had caused so much pain. Darian packed up his things, his mind racing with a mix of anger and determination. An idea began to form. Earlier in the day, he had overheard some senior staff talking about Marcus Vance's dinner plans. Apparently, Marcus and his family frequently dined at an upscale restaurant near the office, a place where they could be seen, where Marcus could flaunt his success to the people who mattered. Darian's jaw tightened. That would be his chance. He'd go there, show up unannounced, and confront Marcus in front of the people he cared about most. He'd make Marcus face the truth, acknowledge what he had done to Lena, to him, and he'd do it in a setting where Marcus couldn't hide behind his office door. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was something. It gave Darian a sense of purpose, a way to channel the anger that had been eating at him for days. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't let Marcus continue living his lie. That evening, Darian sat on the subway, the dim lights flickering above him as the train sped through the tunnels. His fists were clenched tightly in his lap, his mind focused on what he was about to do. He was nervous, of course. He didn't know how Marcus would react, or whether this plan would blow up in his face. But none of that mattered. He had to do it. He couldn't let Marcus get away with what he had done, not without facing the consequences. When Darian arrived at the restaurant, it was just as he had imagined, an elegant place with floor-to-ceiling glass windows and soft lighting, the kind of place where people went to be seen. As Darian stood outside watching the patrons inside, he spotted Marcus almost immediately. Marcus was seated at a table near the window, his wife Vanessa beside him and their son Ethan across from them. They were laughing, enjoying their evening, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Darian's heart raced as he stepped through the door. The restaurant's quiet hum of conversation and the soft clinking of silverware seemed to fade into the background. His mind was focused on one thing, making Marcus Vance finally see him for who he was. He approached the table, each step heavier than the last. Marcus didn't notice him at first. He was too busy gesturing animatedly as he recounted a story to his family. But then, Marcus's eyes lifted and froze. The recognition was instant. Marcus's face tightened, his smile fading as he locked eyes with Darian. For a brief moment, there was silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Darian stopped at the edge of the table, his heart pounding. This was it. The moment everything would come crashing down. The restaurant buzzed with its usual low murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses and the occasional soft laughter from its well-dressed patrons. It was a polished, elegant place, the kind of environment where everything felt curated to perfection. Darian stood at the entrance, his palms damp, his heart racing. He watched Marcus, the man who had once been a distant mystery but was now within arm's reach. Marcus Vance sat at a corner table, his back to the window. His wife Vanessa, her hair perfectly styled, sat beside him, catching the warm glow of the chandeliers. Across from them was Ethan, their son, looking every bit the part of a young man being groomed for success. They were laughing, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to erupt. Darian swallowed hard, nerves threatening to undo him. He had planned for this moment, but now that it was here, doubt crept in at the edges of his mind. His fingers twitched at his sides as he began walking toward their table. Marcus was the first to notice him. Their eyes locked across the space, and Darian saw it immediately. The flicker of recognition, followed by the tightening of Marcus's jaw. The easy smile on Marcus's face faded, replaced by something colder, something he couldn't conceal. For a second, neither of them moved. Darian's heart thundered in his chest as Marcus's eyes hardened, his body tensing as though bracing for impact. Darian reached the table, standing just a foot away. His presence cast a shadow over their perfect family dinner. "Darian," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. His eyes darted quickly to Vanessa and Ethan before returning to Darian. "What are you doing here?" Darian's pulse quickened at Marcus's defensive tone. He glanced at Vanessa and Ethan, both of whom were staring at him with confusion. "I'm here for the same reason you are, Marcus," Darian said, his voice steady but tinged with tension. "Dinner." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, turning to her husband. "Marcus, is this someone from the office?" Marcus cleared his throat, his expression tight. "Yes, Darian's a new employee." Vanessa's eyes shifted between Marcus and Darian, her suspicion evident. "A new employee?" Across the table, Ethan leaned forward, looking Darian up and down. "Doesn't seem like a typical work meeting, Dad. What's going on?" Darian clenched his fists at his sides, his chest tight with the weight of everything unsaid. He could feel Marcus's piercing gaze on him, a silent plea to back down, to walk away. But Darian had come too far to turn back now. "I'm not here about work," Darian said, his voice firm and unwavering, directed squarely at Marcus. "I'm here about something else, something that happened a long time ago." Marcus's expression darkened, his shoulders stiffening. For the first time, Darian saw something in his father's eyes. Fear. Vanessa, sensing the tension, leaned closer to Marcus, her brows furrowing. "Marcus," she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. "What is he talking about?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for his glass, his hand steady but his grip visibly tight. He took a slow sip of wine, his gaze never leaving Darian. "This isn't the time or place for whatever this is," Marcus said finally, his tone calm but controlled. But Darian wasn't about to let him off the hook. His eyes darted to Vanessa, then to Ethan, before settling back on Marcus. "I think it's exactly the time and place." The pause that followed stretched unbearably long, like the moment before a dam gives way. Darian's voice dropped, filled with barely restrained anger. You know who I am, don't you? Marcus's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with something Darian couldn't quite pinpoint, panic, perhaps, or anger at being cornered. Darian, Marcus said quietly, his voice an attempt at control. We can discuss this another time. No, Darian shot back, his voice rising slightly. We talk about it now, in front of them. Ethan frowned, glancing at his father. Dad, what's he talking about? Vanessa placed a hand on Marcus's arm, her concern growing. Marcus, what's going on? Why does he seem so angry? Marcus's face was stoic, his eyes locked on Darian, but the tension in his posture betrayed him. He didn't want this conversation to happen here, and Darian knew it. Taking a deep breath, Darian steadied himself. I'm not just some new employee at your company. I'm the son you abandoned. Vanessa's eyes widened, her hand freezing midair. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to shock. His mouth opened slightly as he looked between Darian and Marcus. Marcus's face turned pale, his jaw tightening. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. Darian stepped closer to the table, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. 24 years ago, you fired my mother, blacklisted her from the industry. You left her with nothing, and you walked away. And now I'm standing here, working for you, while you sit here pretending none of it ever happened. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus, is this true? Ethan's eyes hardened as he stared at his father, anger flashing in his expression. Dad, what is he talking about? Marcus remained silent, the weight of the truth pressing down on the table like a heavy stone. His silence was the only answer they needed. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she turned to Marcus. You have another child? You did this to someone and never told me? Darian felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly as the truth began to crack through the carefully constructed life Marcus had built. He looked at Marcus, his anger giving way to something more complicated, almost pity. You ruined her life, Darian continued, his voice quieter now, more controlled. You left us with nothing, and you think you can just go on living like none of it ever happened? Marcus's face was ashen, the color drained. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, Darian saw him not as the powerful CEO who commanded respect, but as a man trapped in the collapse of his own lies. Vanessa broke the tension, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, how could you? Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse and weak. I made a mistake. I didn't think. You didn't think it would come back to you, Darian said, finishing the sentence for him. But it did. Ethan's face hardened further, his fists clenched on the table. Dad, you seriously did this? You have a son you never told us about? Marcus's hands trembled as he set his glass down. His eyes flicked between his family and Darian, trapped in a moment he couldn't control. I thought it was over. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Darian shook his head, bitterness lacing his voice. It's never over, Marcus. You hurt my mother. You hurt me. And now you're going to have to face that. For a moment, no one spoke. The restaurant's quiet hum seemed to vanish, leaving only the heavy silence of truth. Vanessa's tears fell silently as she stared at the man she thought she knew. Ethan's hands were white-knuckled as he gripped the edge of the table, his jaw tight with rage. Marcus's eyes finally met Darian's again, and this time there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. The restaurant felt cold now, the warm glow of its chandeliers casting long, ominous shadows over the table. Around them, the quiet hum of conversation and clinking silverware continued, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding at Marcus Vance's table. Vanessa wiped her tears, her hand trembling as she placed it on the table in front of her. Marcus, she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. You've been lying to me, to us, all these years? Marcus sat motionless, his face drained of color. He stared at the glass of wine in front of him, his once steady hands now trembling. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his lies had finally crushed him. Ethan leaned forward, his voice tight with anger. You have another son? You ruined someone's life and thought we'd never find out? Darian stood at the edge of the table, his chest heaving with a mix of rage, pain, and something like vindication. The truth was out now, and Marcus couldn't hide behind his power or wealth anymore. He couldn't pretend. Marcus's eyes flickered to Darian for a brief moment before shifting back to his wife and son. I didn't want to hurt you, he began, his voice hoarse. I thought it was over. It was a mistake, a long time ago. A mistake? Darian's voice cut through the tension, sharp and biting. You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed my mother's life. You blacklisted her. You left her with nothing. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You blacklisted her? She asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. Marcus, how could you do something like that? Marcus's composed mask began to crumble in front of his family, his face contorted with guilt and regret, and he opened his mouth as if to explain, but no words came out. He looked cornered, trapped by the weight of the truth he had fought so hard to bury. I had no choice, Marcus said finally, his voice low, almost pleading. I couldn't let it come out. I had a family, a career. I had to protect everything I'd built. Ethan shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. So, you protected yourself and left them to suffer? His voice dripped with disgust. You didn't care about them. You only cared about your reputation. Darian watched as the man who had once seemed untouchable now looked utterly defeated. Marcus's hands shook as he reached for his glass, taking a long sip of wine. His gaze was unfocused, as if he couldn't bear to meet anyone's eyes. Vanessa's tears fell silently as she shook her head, her voice breaking. I trusted you, Marcus. I built a life with you. How could you lie to me like this? How could you do this to your own child? The word child hung in the air, its weight pressing down on the table. Marcus's face twisted with guilt as his eyes finally lifted to meet Vanessa's. I didn't know how to tell you, he said weakly. I thought if I buried it, it would go away. That I could protect you from it. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, her voice trembling. Protect me from the truth? You didn't protect anyone, Marcus. You only protected yourself. Darian stood firm, his fists clenched at his sides. You thought you could erase us. Pretend like we didn't exist. But we do, Marcus. We're real, and we've been living with the consequences of your choices every single day. Marcus's eyes flickered with something like shame, but it was too little, too late. He had lived a life of comfort, building an empire while Lena had struggled to raise Darian alone. There was no excuse, no justification that could undo that. Ethan's face was hard, his voice laced with bitterness. You lied to us, Dad. You built this perfect image, but it's all a lie, isn't it? How many other secrets are there? How many other people have you hurt? Marcus shook his head, his voice barely audible. There's no one else. I swear. Do you expect us to believe you? Vanessa's voice cracked again, her eyes red and swollen from tears. After all this? You've been lying to me for over 20 years, Marcus. I don't even know who you are anymore. Darian's heart twisted at the sight of Vanessa's pain. She had been caught in the crossfire, unaware of the life her husband had left behind. But Darian couldn't allow himself to feel pity for her. Not yet. She was as much a victim of Marcus's lies as he and Lena had been, but there was still so much she didn't know. You're not the only one he hurt, Darian said quietly, his voice cold with anger. My mother, Lena, she tried to get back on her feet after Marcus fired her. She tried to find work, but everywhere she went she was shut out. He blacklisted her. He ruined her reputation. We struggled for years while he sat here, living like nothing had happened. Vanessa's face crumpled as the full weight of Darian's words sank in. She turned to Marcus, her voice barely a whisper. You did that to her? You ruined her life just to protect your own? Marcus's hands trembled as he set his glass down on the table, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. I didn't know what else to do, he said weakly. I was scared. Scared? Darian spat, his voice rising. You don't get to be scared. You didn't lose everything. We did. The room seemed to shrink around them, the once busy restaurant fading into irrelevance. Marcus had nowhere to run, no excuse to hide behind. The truth was out, and the perfect image he had cultivated for so long was crumbling before his eyes. Scared? Ethan's voice rose, thick with disbelief and disgust. That's your excuse? Darian felt the rage bubbling inside him again, but this time it wasn't just for himself. It was for his mother, for all the years Lena had struggled, for all the sacrifices she had made to keep them going. Marcus's fear had cost them everything. You don't get to be scared, Darian said, his voice trembling with fury. You didn't lose everything. We did. Marcus finally looked up at Darian, his eyes filled with something that almost resembled remorse. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words were hollow and weak. I'm so sorry. But Darian wasn't interested in apologies. Not now, not after everything. Sorry doesn't change anything, Darian said coldly. It doesn't fix what you did. You don't get to say sorry and walk away. Marcus opened his mouth to speak again, but Vanessa cut him off, her voice trembling with anger. Darian's right. You don't get to fix this with an apology, Marcus. You lied to us, and you destroyed their lives. She turned to Darian, her expression softening as fresh tears welled in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Darian. I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. Darian's anger simmered, but he nodded slowly. I know this isn't your fault. Ethan, who had been silent for a moment, finally spoke again, his voice filled with disbelief. So what now? What are we supposed to do with this, Dad? Pretend like nothing happened. Marcus didn't respond. He looked down at the table, his hands shaking, his face pale. The man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was now reduced to a shell of the person he had pretended to be. We can't pretend anymore, Vanessa said quietly, her voice heavy with pain. We have to face this. Darian's chest tightened as he watched Marcus sit there in silence, unable to answer for his actions. The truth had finally come out, and the family Marcus had built on lies was crumbling around him. I've said what I needed to say, Darian said, his voice steady but cold. Now it's up to you to decide how to deal with it. Vanessa's tears fell freely now, and even Ethan, who had been filled with anger moments ago, looked lost. The weight of Marcus's betrayal had shattered their family, and there was no going back. Marcus finally looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll fix this. I'll make it right. But Darian shook his head. You can't fix this, Marcus. You can't undo what you've done. With that, Darian turned away from the table, leaving them to grapple with the truth. As he walked out of the restaurant, the weight on his chest loosened just a little. The confrontation was over, and the truth had finally been laid bare. But the damage was done, and there was no turning back. The buzz around the office at Vance Enterprises was different the next morning. Conversations that were usually light and professional now carried a sharp edge of gossip. Eyes darted toward Marcus's office, the glass walls seemingly more transparent than ever, as though everyone inside the building could see the cracks forming around the man who had built an empire. Darian sat at his desk, watching the movement of the people around him. The news had spread faster than he'd expected, and now the whispers had turned into open discussions. Everyone knew Marcus Vance, the untouchable CEO, was no longer invincible. He stared at the report on his screen, the words blurring together. He should have felt some satisfaction, knowing the man who had ruined his mother's life was finally facing consequences. But instead, there was a quiet emptiness settling inside him. The anger that had driven him to confront Marcus wasn't burning as fiercely now. All that was left was the fallout. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. A text from his mother. How are you? Darian sighed and typed a quick response. It's all over the office now. Everyone knows. Her reply came almost instantly. Are you okay? He hesitated before responding. I think so. Just trying to figure out what comes next. Darian leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the far end of the office where Marcus's door remained closed. No one had seen him come in that day, and rumors were already swirling. Some said he was hiding out at home, avoiding the public eye. Others speculated he was meeting with lawyers, trying to shield himself from the storm brewing around him. It didn't matter. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. By noon, Darian's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text from Lena. It was a company-wide email. The subject line was simple: company announcement. His heart raced as he clicked it open. Dear team, effective immediately, Marcus Vance has stepped down from his role as CEO of Vance Enterprises. The board of directors has appointed an interim CEO as the company transitions through this period. We remain committed to our values and will continue to uphold the integrity and reputation of the company. Thank you for your continued dedication during this time. Darian's hand tightened around his phone. It was done. Marcus was out. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the email and letting the words sink in. The man who had wielded so much power, who had destroyed lives without a second thought, had finally lost his seat at the top. But it wasn't the victory Darian had imagined. He had pictured this moment so many times, Marcus's downfall, his public humiliation. But now that it was real, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. Another text from Lena. I just saw the news. Are you okay with this? He stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Yeah, he's done. But it doesn't feel like I thought it would. Her response came slower this time, more measured. It won't feel like you expected, Darian, but you did what you had to. You faced him. That's what matters. Darian closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. She was right. He had done what he needed to do. The truth was out, and Marcus was gone. But the cost of it all still weighed heavy on his chest. The man who had wielded so much power, who had made decisions that destroyed lives without hesitation, had finally lost his place at the top. But it wasn't the victory Darian had imagined. He had pictured this moment so many times, Marcus's downfall, his public humiliation. Yet now that it had actually happened, it didn't feel the way Darian thought it would. There was no rush of triumph, no sense of closure. It just felt hollow. Darian's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Another text from Lena. I just saw the news. Are you okay with this? He stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Yeah, he's done. But it doesn't feel like I thought it would. Her response was slower this time, more deliberate. It won't feel like you expected, Darian, but you did what you had to. You faced him. That's what matters. Darian closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. She was right. He had done what needed to be done. The truth was out, and Marcus was gone. But the cost of it all still weighed heavy on his chest. Later that afternoon, the whispers in the office had grown into full-blown discussions. Darian kept his head down, avoiding the curious glances some colleagues threw his way. He didn't want to be part of the gossip, didn't want to be the center of attention. All he wanted was to get through the day. But as the hours dragged on, Darian knew he couldn't avoid it forever. At some point, he'd have to face the reality of what had happened, not just to Marcus, but to himself. For so long, Darian had been focused on confronting Marcus, on making him pay for what he had done. But now that it was over, Darian was left with the fallout. He was still working at the company Marcus had built, the company that, in part, was built on lies. A knock on his desk snapped Darian out of his thoughts. He looked up to see his supervisor, Miss Peterson, standing there with a calm but serious expression. Can we talk for a minute? She asked. Darian nodded, following her to a quiet conference room at the back of the office. The small room had glass walls that offered a view of the bustling floor outside. Miss Peterson closed the door behind them, folding her arms across her chest as she leaned against the table. So? She began, her tone measured. I'm sure you've seen the news. Darian nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Yeah. She watched him for a moment, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. I know about your connection to Marcus. Darian's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that. You do? Miss Peterson nodded slowly. Word gets around. I don't know all the details, but people are talking. Darian felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the fear of being exposed creeping in. What exactly are they saying? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Mostly that you're his son, that the confrontation at the restaurant wasn't exactly private. Darian's stomach dropped. He hadn't considered that the restaurant, busy and full of people, would become a breeding ground for gossip. Of course, word would spread. I didn't mean for this to happen, Darian said, his voice low. I needed to confront him for what he did. Miss Peterson nodded, her expression softening. I get it. I don't blame you, but you need to be careful, Darian. This company is going through a rough time right now. With Marcus stepping down, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. People will be watching you. Darian swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. What do you mean? I mean you need to decide what you want to do, she said quietly. Staying here, working at the company your father built, it's going to come with challenges. People are going to ask questions, and they're going to want answers. Darian stared at her, his mind racing. He hadn't thought about that. He'd been so focused on confronting Marcus, on forcing him to face the truth, that he hadn't considered the aftermath. Working here, staying in the shadow of Marcus's legacy, it wasn't just about the job anymore. You don't have to decide right now, Miss Werdedy, Peterson added, her voice softer now. But think about it. This place is changing, and you need to figure out if you want to be part of that change. Darian nodded slowly. the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. "Thanks. I'll think about it." Miss Peterson gave him a small nod before stepping out of the room, leaving Darian alone with his thoughts. By the time Darian left the office that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets. He walked slowly, his mind heavy with everything that had happened. Marcus was gone. He had stepped down, forced out by the truth Darian had exposed. But now Darian was left with a choice. Could he stay at Vance Enterprises, knowing the truth about its foundation? Could he continue working in a place so deeply tied to his father's lies? Or was it time to move on, to leave the shadow of Marcus Vance behind and find a new path? He didn't have an answer yet. All Darian knew was that the truth had changed everything, and now he had to decide where he stood in the aftermath. Darian sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the familiar warmth of his mother Lena's apartment. The comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the soft hum of a radio playing quietly in the background. It was a peaceful moment, yet the weight of the last few days still hung heavy in the room. Lena stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal. She hadn't said much since Darian had arrived the night before, and he could feel the unspoken questions lingering in the air. She was waiting for him to talk about what had happened, to tell her what he planned to do next. He didn't have answers yet. But in this small, familiar space, the world didn't feel quite as overwhelming. Lena set the pot aside and turned to face him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Do you want to talk about it?" Darian looked up, the weariness in his bones too heavy to hide. "He's gone," Darian said softly. Marcus stepped down. The company's already announced it. Lena's eyes softened as she sat down across from him. "I heard," she said gently. "It's all over the news. They're calling it a scandal." Darian nodded, rubbing his hands together as he tried to find the right words. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would, Mom. I thought I'd feel something more. Relief, maybe, satisfaction. But I don't." Lena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "That's because it's not just about him," she said. "It's about everything we went through, and nothing he does now can change what happened." Darian looked down at her hand, noticing the lines of wear and resilience etched into her skin. She had carried so much for so long, and even though Marcus was out of the picture now, the scars from those years of struggle remained. "I don't know what to do next," Darian admitted, his voice quiet. "Staying at the company feels wrong, but leaving, I don't know if that's the answer either." Lena nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to decide everything right now," she said. "You've already done the hardest part. You faced him. You made him own up to what he did." Darian swallowed hard, the memory of that confrontation still fresh in his mind. "I just keep thinking about all those years, all the times I asked about my father, and you couldn't tell me the truth. And now that I know, it feels like it wasn't worth it." Lena's expression softened. She leaned forward, her voice firm yet gentle. "It was worth it, Darian. You deserved to know the truth, and no matter how painful it was, you needed to hear it." Darian let out a shaky breath, her words settling into him. She was right. The truth, as painful as it was, had shattered the illusions he had carried, but it was still his truth, and with everything laid bare, he could finally begin to move forward. "I just don't know where to go from here," Darian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena's hand tightened around his. "You're strong, Darian. Stronger than you know. You've been through it all, and you've come out the other side. Now, you get to decide what happens next. You get to build the life you want, without anyone holding you back." Darian met her eyes, and for the first time in days he felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. "You're right," he said softly. "I can move on from this." Lena smiled, a tired but proud smile. "We both can." The day passed slowly, filled with small moments of comfort. Darian stayed with Lena, helping her around the apartment, cooking dinner together, and sharing stories about anything but Marcus Vance. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to enjoy the simplicity of being together, free from the weight of the past. Later that evening, as they sat on the couch watching a rerun of an old sitcom, Darian turned to Lena. The question that had been on his mind all day finally pushed its way to the surface. "Do you think?" Darian hesitated, then continued. Do you think we'll ever get real justice for what he did? Lena's gaze remained fixed on the TV, her face thoughtful. After a moment, she turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. We already have, in a way, she said. Darian frowned, confused. What do you mean? She took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes. Justice isn't always about punishment, Darian. Sometimes it's about survival. Marcus may have destroyed my career, but he didn't destroy me. I raised you. We survived. Darian stared at her, the depth of her words slowly sinking in. She was right. Despite everything Marcus had done, despite all the obstacles he had placed in their path, they had survived. They had built a life together. It wasn't easy, Lena continued, and it wasn't fair. But we made it, and that's a kind of justice he can't take away. Darian felt a lump rise in his throat, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He had spent so long focused on bringing Marcus down, on making him pay for what he had done. But now, sitting here with his mother, he realized that their survival was the real victory. I guess you're right, Darian said softly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. We're still here. Lena squeezed his hand. Her eyes filled with love and pride, and we always will be. Darian gazed at Lena, her words settling deep into his heart. She was right. They had endured, thrived even, despite all that Marcus had done. The obstacles, the betrayals, the struggles, they had built a life together in the aftermath of it all. Justice, Lena continued, her voice steady and unwavering, isn't just about seeing someone fall. It's about us standing tall, and Darian, we're still standing. A lump rose in Darian's throat as emotions swirled within him, too vast and complex to articulate. He had spent years consumed by the idea of confronting Marcus Vance, of making him pay for the pain he had caused. But now, sitting here with his mother, he realized something profound. The real victory wasn't in Marcus's downfall. It was in their resilience, in the fact that they had made it this far. I guess you're right, Darian said softly, a small, genuine smile forming on his lips. We're still here. Lena squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. And we always will be. The next morning, Darian woke up feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer felt suffocating. It was as though a door had closed, leaving space for new beginnings. As the early morning sunlight streamed through the window, he stood in the kitchen brewing coffee. The world outside was still and peaceful, offering a sense of calm that mirrored the quiet hope blossoming within him. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the table. Lena appeared moments later, still in her robe. She smiled when she saw him. Morning, she said, her voice warm and soft. Morning, Darian replied, handing her a cup. They sat together in companionable silence, the stillness of the morning wrapping around them like a warm blanket. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was no need to. A new understanding had taken root between them, a peace that hadn't been there before. Finally, Darian broke the silence. I think I'm going to leave Vance Industries. Lena looked at him, her expression calm but supportive. You don't have to decide right now, she said gently. I know, Darian replied, taking a sip of his coffee. But I think it's the right move. I can't stay there, working in the shadow of what he did. I need to do something else. Something that's mine. Lena nodded, pride evident in her eyes. I think that's a good idea. Darian smiled, the weight on his chest lifting. Yeah, it is. They stayed at the table a while longer, talking quietly about the future, about possibilities that had once seemed so far away but now felt within reach. For the first time in years, Darian felt a sense of control over his own life. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer had the power to define him. He had faced his father, confronted the truth, and now he was free to move forward, to build a life on his own terms. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow through the kitchen, Darian glanced at Lena. His heart swelled with gratitude for everything they had endured together. We made it, he said quietly, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Lena smiled back, her eyes brimming with love and pride. Yes, we did.